My name is Geoffrey Kamanzi. I'm the manager in charge of trade services, the Department of Policy at the East African Business Council, Arusha. On behalf of my CEO, Dr. Tamadhuki, let me thank you for having made this time to discuss issues around transport and logistics sector, but it's most specifically issues on the transport along the land, where we cross the borders with our trucks through plowing through the East African community borders. One of the key priorities of the East African community is in the improvement of regional transport for goods and the movement of services, suppliers, and citizens. And progress is definitely most visible in cooperation to reduce NTBs on the northern and central corridors where our products cross as they hit their final destinations. However, the movement of cargo, as you all know, across the EAC land borders has been majorly affected by COVID-19. The industry, and that is transport and logistics, which is facilitating cargo movement to and from different geographical locations, supports key economic sectors such as manufacturing, agriculture, even aid that is bringing the PPEs, these protective gears that are helping to fight the pandemic. So NTB is affecting even delivery of such products. However, the interventions to stop the spread of COVID in all the EAC partner states have definitely created some hurdles in the movement of cargo, service suppliers, and people across the EAC borders. And definitely that is understandable. Each partner state is trying to fight a war of combating the reduction of spread of COVID-19. Disruptions in the transports and logistics have caused a halt in movement of people and goods. Logistics companies have laid off workers amidst the breakdown of their supply chain due to severe disruptions in inbound and outbound logistics in air cargo shipments, etc. In line with above, what I've just said, EABC has organized this transport logistics webinar to engage the private sector operators, policymakers, and sector players to see how we can chart out strategy for this really critical sector of business in the region. So without further ado, let me introduce my able-bodied panelists to this webinar to discuss further. I'm very sure they will deliver the right message in terms of how we can survive, in terms of how are we fighting, and how are we seeing the future of transport and logistics ahead. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Dr. Miriam Sebunya, Chairperson, Uganda National Logistics Platform, to tell us if she's actually around in the first place. Dr. Miriam, are you available? Dr. Miriam, if you can just unmute your microphone, please, we'll appreciate it. Okay, if she'll join later, I'm sure. Let's see if, let's confirm that Mr. Auni definitely is around. Mr. Robert, Mr. Robert joined? Ladies and gentlemen. Not yet. Ali Dewiji is definitely around. Ali Dewiji, who is representing Ms. Angelina Ngarula. Ali, you're welcome. I can see you. Mr. Robert, not yet.
I wait for you.
All right. There's not a problem. Let's start with those that are available, and just to get your feel, Mr. Ali Dewiji, how has the transport sector and logistics sector in the EAC been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and what has been the response from the road transport sector players including yourself as a seasoned transport sector, private sector player. So what has been the response from the transport sector players in mitigating the effects? Mr. Ali Dewiji.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Angelina, who is the chairperson of the Tanzania Truck Owners Association and also the acting chairperson of the Tanzania Private Sector Foundation. In terms of, I'm just going to give you a small brief in terms of my personal history in this sector. I've been in this industry for about 14 years. I have worked with Angelina and these associations for the last 10 years. I currently serve on the board of the Tanzania Truck Owners Association, and so have been quite heavily involved in preventing and combating the impact of COVID in our industry and the industries around us, especially the transport industry. In terms of the response that the associations here have given, the associations have all followed cue from the directives of the government of Tanzania and have always worked closely with them because we also understand that there's a responsibility as leaders of businesses, leaders of associations, and then leaders as the government, that for trade to work, one of the most fundamental things that is required is trust. You have to trust who you're trading with, and you have to create an environment that the trading is done in a very hospitable environment where both the buyer and the seller have no other mandate but to do the transaction. They're not supposed to be in a marketplace where they are afraid of the unknown, afraid of what is happening, afraid of not being able to execute their contracts. So it has been with that spirit, we have been approaching the whole situation with COVID. As industry leaders, we also understand that one of the most fundamental parts of the whole supply chain is that human being who's actually driving that physical truck, who is now executing the contract between the buyer and the seller to deliver the particular product across the whole region, without fear that there is, with an additional fear. There is fear intrinsically that there might be accidents, there might be problems on the road. Now with an additional fear of there is now Corona on the road. We have, as an association, tried capacity building. The employees of the companies that work in this industry, along with trying to reach to the grassroots to educate drivers on good sanitation, on Corona itself. We were used to educating drivers about other diseases like Ebola, cholera, etc. That is normal, it happens in this region, but now we have to really take it to the next level and explain about Corona. What particularly helped our situation in Tanzania, and I would say in East Africa, is that the war drum of Corona, I would say, was very, very loud. Even before our governments got involved, everybody knew about Corona in some way or some form. So people were to some degree mentally prepared, that there is this pandemic, it is growing, it is coming. We're seeing the responses of many different countries, how they're dealing with it. And finally, when it arrived into East Africa, we had already learned we could leapfrog to some level to be like, okay, what do we need to do? I'm displaying some positivity, but I will say that at one point in time here, there was a very big sense of fear, fear of the unknown. It happened to the best of us, but we stayed together, and we currently, the situation in Tanzania is that it's business as usual, but with caution. And we, from our experiences, because our experience was a little bit unique as to our member states, there wasn't a lockdown. There was social distancing, but there were some other preventative measures that people took. For example, a few of the transport companies decided that, listen, we are critical to this particular, we are a critical industry. We cannot afford our, not alone our drivers, but our workshops not to function. Trucks have to be repaired, trailers have to be repaired, port operations have to be done. And so stepped in to provide additional transport services to their particular employees, to bring them from their homes to the workplace, so that they do not mix with the general mass transit, to try and mitigate the spread of corona as a safety measure. So apart from that, we have been working together. We have been mingling together, and from what our experience is that, yes, there is corona, but it can be, you can take precaution, but it has not spread, because if it would have spread very, very, very hard, we as the transport industry would know, because there are many players in our supply chain. You know, there's many individuals spread regionally. You know, we have had cases, a few rare cases of drivers being marked as positive and then later on being cleared. You know, but we haven't had any serious casualties. You know, with corona. So our approach as a country has been quite unique, quite different, and hopefully it will build some confidence, you know, to other stakeholders and other trading partners that, you know, here is an example of this country that took a risk in their own way on how to combat, and things are moving and business is continuing. So, you know, we should also open up, because opening up is very, very important, particularly for us in East Africa, because over the last 10 years, within Tanzania, a lot of infrastructure has been developed. And a couple of years ago, I personally started noticing in our industry that there isn't also, there is trade traditionally on the east coast of Africa originates from the port of Mombasa or the port of Dar es Salaam to go inland, to go from east to west, because the road infrastructure has been built east to west, if you look at the map of East Africa. But what we've also noticed in the last 5 years is there's a lot of movement of cargo that goes north and south. There's a lot of cargo moving from Zambia all the way to South Sudan. There's cargo moving from Zimbabwe all the way to Kenya. There's cargo starting from Kenya going all the way down south. So we're at a crossroad in terms of this industry. And we have to make sure that deliveries are made, confidence is brought back in, you know, because that's important for this region to flourish. And that there is stability, regional stability, and there's peace, because we've also seen in certain pockets of Africa, you know, xenophobia. And xenophobia also comes with fear of the unknown, you know, and we don't want to be in a situation in East Africa where we fear our neighbor. We have to work with our neighbor, and we have to keep adding more neighbors for us to trade more, you know. So that is, to some degree, our stance. As an industry, we have been affected, more so on the East African side. We are also part of the SADC region, and so we have a responsibility to that region because we also serve that market. In fact, that market makes up quite a substantial amount of volume for us as an industry that we service. And that market and that region has had a completely different approach to the East African community's approach. But there is movement of cargo. There are problems, in particular in terms of container damages accruing and blockades. We have worked closely with the Ministry of Health in Tanzania to do driver testing. We have participated in the driver testing program. To some level, I personally have got tested at the same center where drivers get tested to see the quality of the testing, to see the process of the testing, to ensure that even the drivers that drive in the supply chain can see that, it's not that it is only them that are getting tested to some degree. But also we have to be realistic in terms of the economic cost of testing people and the validity of these tests. And for how long can we subject these drivers to be tested? We have to make a pragmatic decision as a government, but also as the private sector to be like, okay, where else could this resource be used? Swabbing a driver costs money. The government is paying for it, but there could be other areas where these resources could be used in other health initiatives that can go and foster a better climate for trade. So that's basically our response to this pandemic. For us, it is there. It's not going anywhere. We have to live with it, but business has to continue. I yield back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Well said and well put. Actually, you've mentioned something to do with economic costs that are coming with the sector, including the demurrage costs, the testing issues, the validity of the testing results. That is, I think, one of the major issues that will have come out from where we have been engaging at our border posts. Those are quite costs that are really definitely transferred to the final consumer. I will come back to you regarding your proposal on the recovery strategy, but let's go to Mr. Aouni. You'll forgive me if I mention your name, if that's not a spelling. Excuse me. Mr. Aouni, in your opinion, how is the future of transport and logistics in general post-COVID-19, the EAC, with specific emphasis on the road transport side? How do you see this sector ahead? Is it going to die? Is it going to recover? And if so, how? How so? What would be your opinion in that regard? Over to you, Mr. Aouni.
Thank you very much. My first question is, do we have a choice? Answer to that is no. Therefore, the future is going to be as bright as, in fact, what Mr. Ali has talked about. It's a serious issue in terms of the movement of goods around the region. If the countries become too paranoid with infiltration through the borders via cargo movement, this will mean that more countries will start to rely on goods from somewhere else rather than within the region itself. And this is a certain aspect of not having fluid trading across our boundaries here. How do we see the future in terms of what has happened in the last 3 months, what is happening right now, and what we would like to see? So what has been happening is, first of all, the countries were in shock, except for my motherland, and I can say it's my motherland because my mother was born, bred in Tanzania. The rest, we just went into a state of shock, and we took every precaution possible in the book, and more possibly, to try and mitigate the spread. Obviously, it has augured well in terms of this period of time. Now, we are coming to a situation where that anything further can only lead to serious economic, dare I say the word, collapse. So I think we are all realizing or coming to realization, the governments are coming to realization that COVID is not the only thing that we have to worry about right now. It has to start to, the economy has to revive, the economies have to survive and of course thrive. So my take is that with all the measures that the governments have put in the movement, and we are putting in more measures through our own other linkages we have with the revenue authorities. We are working on programs with CAMEA to have digital certification or digital coding on your phones or drivers' phones to allow them to proceed without having to stop every 200 yards for a temperature check, etc., etc. So I think a lot is behind us. What we have to do now is to maintain a certain aspect of the protocols that have been in place. We have to respect them because of our own health, for our own survival. And I'm sure that this is what the presidents of the other countries are worried about, in that if they remove or they make it, they keep it completely open for everybody to go back to as we were in February, the fear is that people will not respect these protocols. Everything will be forgotten. People will go with life as it was, and that would obviously not augur well for us all, because there is definitely a huge risk to the virus spreading even further. So, if we maintain protocols, if we carry on with what we have done so far to protect our drivers, ourselves, our health workers, all that, I believe the investment has been made. We have gone through this quite at an extent, and we need now to be self-governed in that aspect. This is how I see that the flow of goods, the flow of even people in that respect, will certainly go back to where we were before. Yes, we will have like what we had after 9/11. You literally had to drop your pants at the airport. So we'll have those kind of checks and balances at certain places when you are crossing, when you are boarding aircraft, when you are approaching into buildings, etc., etc. But it will become a way of life. Hello.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oni. Well put. Indeed, we need to respect the protocols that have been put in place by our principals and the line ministries. And actually, these protocols are quite protective in nature, and it is important that we really abide by these protocols. These protocols will definitely guide the movement of cargo across the region. While we still have the microphone, Mr. Oni, how would transport companies sustain their businesses in the AAC in the face of disrupted global supply chain? Because transport is definitely an enabler. If now disruptions in that sector have come into play, how do we now advise our businesses to survive in the face of this pandemic? Mr. Aoni.
Thank you, Geoffrey. We have to basically learn. We have learned a lot. I can talk of Bolloré and a few other transporters that we work with. We went through certain spikes, hurdles, but today I think we are fairly endowed in many ways, I must say, in making sure that we have the necessary system, the available tools, the training for the people, and we have learned very good lessons in terms of actually managing ourselves better. We have seen that if you make sure that your coordination, your monitoring, implementation, and what I mentioned earlier in terms of the tools and IT system and the training are in order, in fact, I see that in the business of logistics, and I'm not talking of transport only in this case, because transport, yes, transporters have suffered. I really have big empathy for all these drivers who have endured themselves to, travel through this, through these countries, through the borders with all the issues that they came through. So I think let's park that aside because enough has been said. I mean, not enough, but a lot has been said. There'll be a few more things to say, but at least it moves better than it was a month ago or so. So in general, I think logistics companies have re-evaluated themselves. We have done things that will mitigate us from any exposure of such a nature, and number two, actually made us more efficient in many ways, actually. So I see that if we continue along those lines, the business can be well sustained. Whatever we might have lost, it is in two ways. One is the volume has not been there, so therefore maybe you don't need that many people to handle it, but the volumes will come back, and obviously you will need the people back. The second part is on the actual movement of cargo. We have suffered a lot in terms of delays and demurrages, and I think you mentioned earlier, I don't know whether it was Mr. Ali who mentioned earlier, that the issue of demurrages, and I want to actually say one thing here. To be honest with you, I feel that the government has concentrated so much only on testing, on protocols to sustain this pandemic and COVID-19, in that they have not done enough for us. When I talk of us, and I'm talking cargo owners as well, to shield us from the additional costs that are coming through in terms of storage, in terms of demurrage, in terms of penalties for delays, things like that. And I believe that the maritime authorities of each of these countries, for a better word, should probably just, hang up their boots and say, we are not an authority. Let the shipping lines do what they want. Let the port authorities do what they want, and everybody can have a field day. So really, we need structure. We need these authorities to come in with the clout that they have, and reel these other people who are actually making a fortune out of COVID-19 at the expense of the rest of us. That's what I have to say for now, Geoffrey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Awani. Well put. It's not time to rip off. It's time to join each other with combined efforts to fight the common enemy, and that's indeed. And I appreciate the fact that now you say logistics companies need to refocus, to reevaluate themselves, and go back to the drawing board and pull out those ideas that could sustain business. It is a pertinent question, recommendation, and the recommendation that you've given us in terms of how we should call upon the government to cushion further the sector from these adverse effects. Thank you so much. I'll definitely come back to you on your personal experience and how you're doing it at your company. But let's go to Dr. Marian if she's around and she has unmuted her microphone. Dr. Marian, what are the challenges facing transport?
Before you give my former president and my dear lady, I can answer that question in 3 words, or 2 words, or 3 words. With great difficulty is my answer. Okay. President Marian, over to you.
Thank you to my former president also. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I missed the beginning. I hope I didn't miss much. I'm present, sir, ready for you.
All right, you're welcome, Dr. Marian. You have definitely not missed a lot, and you've come at an opportune time that we need to talk to you and you to talk to us. What are the challenges facing transport and logistics players at the borders while moving cargo across the EAC region? And maybe to add, what should they expect from the recently launched regional electronic cargo and truck drivers system, RECDTS? Dr. Marian, over to you.
Okay, thank you. That's, I don't know even where to begin. The challenges at the borders have been a nightmare. And what most of you must have seen is traffic jams stretching as far as 80 kilometers on some days, especially the border of Maraba. There was Maraba, there was Kula, there was Elegu. At one time, Elegu was the winner in that jam, and that, but most of the time it has been Maraba, Lucia to a lesser extent. So the only way I can describe it, the challenge, I started with it has been a nightmare. And I don't know how you even picked the question to ask me, because I had to get involved personally to study what's going on at the borders, to understand and design solutions, because the biggest challenge was our drivers. Our drivers were tortured, I would say. I don't know whether we tended to look at the drivers from the beginning. We didn't seem to pay too much attention to their personal being, their welfare, the welfare of the drivers. Neither did us, the employers or the governments, look at them as focus in order to achieve what we want. So what we have experienced are those traffic jams that have been a very big challenge. And most of the infections, for example, for Uganda, came from the drivers. At the beginning, the first month when we were testing, it was always drivers, and in double digits. And what caused that, we engaged with the Ministry of Health, and we discovered that at the borders, as they waited to be tested or waited for results, they mingled too much. But we were so lucky that they were not getting into the community so much. But amongst themselves, that's where the biggest infections happened, at the border, traffic jams. And in traffic jams, if it was the border, like at
Dr. Marian, we've lost you a bit. Are you still online? You reconnect, please. We have lost you. Can you hear us? All right. Maybe just to inform the attendees that the Microsoft Cloud has a chat room bug. So at the moment we won't be able to see the chat, but you can send your comments and questions via our Twitter handle, which is at EABC Arusha. The Twitter handle is at EABC Arusha. You can see it. My colleague showing you with a cursor. You can just send your questions or your comments on our Twitter handle, which is at EABC Arusha. Thank you. So, Dr. Miran, if you're back, please, you can go ahead and carry on. Thank you. Dr. Miran, not yet back. She must have faced a problem. Maybe we need to go back to.
She's back.
She's back. Dr. Marian, you're back.
Hello.
Yes. Good to have you back. You're welcome back, Marian.
Sorry. I got disconnected on my iPad. I used the phone. Okay.
All right.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Carry on. Thank you.
So I was, the challenges has been the traffic jams and the welfare and health of our drivers. We have had, when trucks are held up in such, to such an extent, then the businesses also start failing because we have bonds exhausted, standing at the border for a week, 2 weeks, and across all the borders for some companies, and therefore now even operations start to slow down. You can't, first of all, you can't find the trucks because they are all in Nelegu, in Malaba, in Busia, in Mutukura. I'm talking about the case of Uganda, but I guess it applies to all the other countries. So you have trucks held at the borders together with the customs bonds that we guarantee taxes with. Then you have tired, hungry, and angry drivers at the borders, misbehaving and getting irritated, and so they forget social distance, they forget, and in the process, they are getting infected. We have loss of course of income, where a trip, where in a month you would make 4 trips with your truck, you end up making 2 trips if you are lucky, because some trucks were held up at some point for more than 2 weeks. And when we went to inquire into what the problem could be, first of all, we took long to get concerned about the jams, because we were being told they are waiting for results. Samples have been taken, results are not coming back. But typical of the style we work in our countries, even the private sector and our governments, we work in silos. So if traffic is building up and we don't know what's making, we wait for it to move. I was shocked that even us in the private sector, we were waiting for traffic to move without getting into the details of why isn't it moving. And the revenue authorities were also, they are the lead agencies at the borders. They were watching the traffic build up, and they are being told the results for the tests are not out. And yeah, so we wait until the results come without going to find out what's delaying the results. That's not my job. That's Ministry of Health. I will wait until they bring results. So we were faced even with that situation of working in silos and not coordinated, and not having targets and timelines in which to perform those targets. And in the end, when the private sector, we were stuck for bonds, stuck for trucks. People in truck owners in Mombasa, for example, were saying, we can't load to go and wait at the border for for 2 weeks. So we'll wait until we will not load anything until the border has cleared. So there was a stalemate at some point, and my former president, Mr. Auni, at some point attempted SGR, and I don't know when he got to Naivasha whether he didn't need trucks, but that's how I think desperate we were. We were trying to now devise other means instead of going to the border to solve the problems at the borders. What is the problem? So we said if the trucks are stuck, let's try rail. So that was another challenge of uncoordinated working. So when we went down to the ground to find out, it was, of course, Ministry of Health delaying the results to come out. And yet we were being told, yes, results come out in every 8 hours, we get results coming out. But so where are they? People gave their samples 2 weeks ago. Where are the results? So we found out that because we have a surveillance system, and that's where the results need to be released to, we could not give hard copies of results to the drivers so that they can move as you upload your results into the system. Of course, there are challenges also in the, when I asked why it's not the practice that as the lab releases results, then you issue them. It was like there can be a compromise somewhere. They can be compromised, yes, but at 20 kilometers we could say no, let's hold on. But when it gets to 80 kilometers, we can release once the results hard copy so that the drivers move on. Or so my question to URA was, if every day you've been getting 1,500 or 200 trucks, and you now start getting 300 trucks per day, why aren't you getting concerned? Because you are looking for revenue. Why aren't you getting concerned to find out? So what I'm trying to bring out here, challenge is working in silos. That's one of the challenges. And when we started working together, the lead agency, URA, came up and took the challenge, meeting every day with all the other agencies, reviewing their targets and their timelines, and traffic started clearing. Then the question of test kits came up. And this is nothing that people, even Ministry of Health, I understand, could do about it, because globally, I hear they are monitored and controlled or something like that. So it's not like every time you need test kits, you'll get them. So even there has been a problem. That was another challenge. So the rects, now it's rects. What rects is what the electronic regional electronic cargo tracking system. What we should expect to see out of it is that this was a system to track cargo and protect revenue. So now we are adding the drivers into that system, and drivers can be tracked. And I think here what it addresses is the fact that we previously, to find a driver when you get their results when they have already gone, was going to be it proved to be a challenge also. But now, because we were tracking only cargo, so now the driver has been added, the driver's telephone number is known, you can send them a message, you can ask them to report somewhere, however they want to manage it. And we are working with the Ministry of Health and trademark and EAC to make this system broader. Actually, by the time they sort of adding the drivers to cargo tracking, we had also developed a journey management system, an app that was going to take care of the driver, not only track him, but take care of his welfare and his behavior. But this needed designated stop places, which have been introduced also, but not operating yet. So the journey management system, when it comes on later, it will take care of the behavior of the driver, the welfare of the driver, etc., etc. But right now, what to expect out of this one is that we shall keep track of the driver. But later, when we either integrate the two systems or interface them, we will take more of we will take care of more of the driver and create discipline. The journey management system actually quarantine days when they have been tested and are free to move in the region, and they'll be quarantined in the system. They will not be able to leave until 14 days when they exit the system and then go to for a break and come back later and re-enter the system. So the journey management system and the regional electronic cargo and driver tracking system will create some level of comfort, perhaps, to the governments also, since testing kits are very expensive and very rare, also not readily available. Maybe this will help. When you are tracking the driver, you will not need to test them all the time. However, at the beginning, it was a real big challenge, poking the driver's nose at every border, and sometimes it's a difference of 2 days, and the drivers were complaining it's too intrusive. In the one driver told me that swab goes up to the eye. They put it through the nose and it goes to the eye. So those have been the challenges, and that's the hope we have in the tracking system, but it will add some level of discipline for the drivers. And yeah.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you, Marian. That's a very elaborate submission on what is actually happening on the ground. But I think the underlying point here is working in silos, and this is because of lack of a coordinated approach on how, at the regional level, on how we really combat this virus. You find that each partner state is instituting their very own protective measures, and this has really definitely hampered movement of cargo. But we shall come back to you. I can see Mr. Ali's hand up. Mr. Ali, do you want to react, maybe to compliment Dr. Marian? I can see your hand up.
Yeah.
Or maybe.
Yes, I would like to compliment Doctor. Thank you very much for your submission, Doctor. I've written some points down. Doctor mentioned about customs bonds and expiry of customs bonds. The gentleman before me discussed about demurrages, etc. You know, every situation, every challenge, there have to be people that rise up to solve that challenge. And in this particular challenge of COVID, and how unknowingly a health problem comes really quickly and propagates into a very, very streamlined logistics corridor. I mean, there's been so much progress that has been made in East Africa in terms of regional trade. Okay, so many NTBs have been abolished. One stop border post. I mean, we've done everything, to the highest degree, and that is why we're seeing such large GDP figure growth, on a year by year basis. And then you have something very obscure come in and upset the whole balance. Shows that there is a risk, and there'll always be a risk in these corridors, but shows the need for the regulator. And there are regulators in all these countries, in all these member states. They have got the mandate to impartially balance and bring all the supply chain players together, right? They need to act, and they need to be at the forefront. They need to be capacity built, or they need to step up their game, because there are commercial agreements between the shipping line and the shipping agent, and then the shipping agent, and then the clearing agent, and the clearing agent, and the transporter, and the final consignee at times, right? Who takes on the burden of any losses, and this was a very, very difficult point to bring across to our regulator here, also within Tanzania, which is known as TASAC. But they understood, and they gave a directive out. But again, we don't want to kill the shipping lines. We don't also want to kill our customers. We depend, because we are all part of the supply chain. And we don't also want to panic and be like, we don't want to pay damages. This is business. Everybody has to take a risk. Okay, there's profit, there's losses. In times of losses like these, we learn a lot about our businesses, how to streamline, how to chop expenses, how to react, how quickly to react. But it's time for the regulators to step up and act and have their word be final. We cannot depend on one particular part of the supply chain is not in East Africa, and it is at sea, and it's the shipping line. And to be honest, they've done a lot of capital expenditure in this supply chain. I mean, they own ships and they bring the goods, but their principles are not within the East African community. They have shipping agents, and at times it was very challenging that you'd go to the shipping lines and be like, all right, damages, guys, it's force majeure, the border is closed, what are we supposed to do? There's container damages, right? And they'd be like, yeah, we have to refer to our principals. And we're like, your principals are not sitting on the moon, they're living on Earth. They also have corona in those areas, Give the waivers on damages, or let's get on the table and discuss, And the regulators, many of them failed to notice this, because everybody was busy about healthcare and, testing and this and that. So we need regulators to act. It's very important, because one thing that we have to be very, very concerned about is that we are worried about capital flight. We are worried about money leaving our economy, physical, tangible money. When your foreign exchanges are being affected, and they have been, East Africa to a very large proportion is dependent on tourism, as a principal contributor to the GDP. When that is evaporated, your regulator and your government have to be in sync, and the whole block has to be in sync to prevent further forex flight. That now you're starting to pay damages to a principal sitting halfway across the world for damages that everybody knows should be waived for humanitarian reasons, right? It's not like the shipping line is going to go bankrupt if you haven't paid for a couple of containers. That's a business risk they took also. So there's that. One other thing that has really, to some degree, helped, particularly in our industry, to cushion part of these losses in an indirect way is the drop in fuel prices. The drop in fuel prices has taken time to propagate from the well to the gas station in East Africa. We're seeing almost 800 shillings, 700 shillings difference in price of diesel, which constitutes almost about 40 to 50% of our operating costs as a trucking company. So those savings now are technically being paid out to a shipping line for damages back in dollars again, and leaving East Africa instead of staying in East Africa, So that is one thing that the regulator also has to look into and try and harmonize. And again, if you're a shipping line, if you want to recover your costs, You don't need to recover your costs today because you are incorporated in an economy, which is much larger than our economy. You can decide to be like, you know what, for the next 3 years, I'm going to put a small surcharge of maybe $20 per container coming into East Africa, and cushion this demurrage and spread it across. There are ways to solve a problem. You can't be like, pay $2,000, otherwise we don't take this container back to the depot, and then that container is stuck on the truck, so now the truck isn't moving, so there's no economic activity. In terms of the border situation, I know a lot of people were appalled to see the videos of Malabar border, the chopper taking that. I'm sure many of us saw that chopper with the whole blockade. Okay, honestly speaking, it was very bad. But in terms of Tanzania, that is normal. We see that all the time in the DRC, especially between Kasumbalesa and Kitwe. You're talking about not issues of health, but just issues of customs delays, etc., and the border or system breakdowns of revenue authorities. And you'll see overnight the line to go into the DRC stretches from 3 kilometers to 60 kilometers. So our drivers are kind of used to seeing that. We condone it. We don't want that to happen, but it's something that we have been kind of prepared. I want to touch on one issue of relay driving. Relay driving was proposed by some member states and was vehemently discouraged. And thank God it hasn't been put into effect. We've also seen that the Trademark East Africa has been promoting the use of this driver testing system that's on the mobile phone. That and relay driving to some degree go hand in hand. However, we have to be very, very careful. We have single customs territory. We've got electronic cargo tracking system. Now we're starting to track drivers. These systems are to some degree expensive to maintain. They might be free right now, but nothing's free forever. The cost is going to get passed down to the consumer. Further, these systems deprecate. The business environment changes. How are we preparing to iterate these systems going forward? Because we don't want to be stuck in a situation where we're using an archaic way of doing it. Right now, it might be the most novel way, the most efficient way to do it, but in 6 months' time, it might be an archaic way of doing it because we learn and iterate from how the testing works, how the results works, etc. We don't want to be in a situation where it becomes a burden. Like the electronic cargo tracking system, to some degree, has helped a lot with dumping of fuel and controlling, movement of goods. But it's a burden in some cases because it's not case specific. You're using the same resources as a company and as a government to safeguard revenue loss on low value items and high value items, perishable items and non-perishable items. For example, in Tanzania, we transport a lot of chemicals of low value, high volume. Now, would you use those resources of ECTS to monitor fuel that can easily be dumped, that has got a high value and a higher propensity to be dumped, or chemicals that really don't have a high value and there's no consumer for it on the side of the road that cannot be dumped? But the law has been enshrined that everything has to go via ECTS. Now, we don't want the same thing to spill over in terms of the driver app that they've built, because we have to be wary that you have to have that fluidity. That fluidity is what brings the business. Now, if you have a very robust and strict system, it's going to detriment the movement of people and goods in the economy. Now, that brings me to relay driving. Relay driving, I have explored relay driving in developed corridors, not in Africa. And I've seen particularly in Australia where they use relay driving. And what is the basis of relay driving? The basis of relay driving at that point in those economies is that You have a truck, it's a machine. It's like a plane. It doesn't need to park. It needs to move and keep moving. So you relay drive by putting two drivers in the vehicle. One drives during the day, one drives during the night to get those goods to the destination as quickly as possible. They do that to safeguard the health of the driver so that he doesn't get fatigue, etc. Right? And it's a viable option, but it is something that is going to come in the next 10, 15 years in our industry. We're not ready for it, and we cannot force it because there's a lot of risks involved. Today, you go to Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, anywhere in East Africa. If you walk into a trucker's yard and you're like, that particular truck, whose truck is it? They'll be like, yeah, ile gari, it doesn't belong to Bolore, it belongs to Yuma Hassani. Why? Because he's the driver for it. There's this mentality of attaching a driver to a vehicle because to safeguard the utility of that vehicle, it's in the driver's mind frame, it's in the hauler's mind frame, it's in the customs mind frame that, one truck can be driven by one person. It is a mind frame that propagates all the way to the regulator. In Tanzania, you have to get a land transport license for every truck. And when you do that, you have to submit the name of the driver who's going to be driving that truck. So in essence, you are linking one driver to one truck, and that's it. And that's the norm. And that needs to be shaken up. So you cannot jump to relay driving to be like, yeah, okay, when he gets to Uganda, we'll put a Ugandan driver in this truck, and business will be as usual. We will get to that stage. We could get to that stage, right? But first, internally within our countries, we have to build confidence between businesses and authorities, businesses themselves, drivers themselves to be able to trust each other to be like, yeah, I'm giving you my truck to drive from here for 300 kilometers, and I'm going to take over from 300 kilometers to 600 kilometers. They're afraid because if the truck breaks down, the truck is not moving, the driver is not making any money. So the future is going to yield two things, according to me, in this region. The future is coming very quickly. One is the issue of relay driving. It will come, it's inevitable. You cannot have a machine be parked because it's nighttime simply, right? You cannot have customs close office at the border because it's nighttime, right? Work happens at night also. The economy doesn't shut down. But an interesting thing will be how technology is going to come into play. And we've seen that there are companies in the world that are developing electric vehicles. And part of the problem of vehicles was the environment. But I think intrinsically, they were also trying to solve the problem of the driver himself. That, there might be autonomous vehicles in our market in the next 10 years, And so now what's going to happen about COVID in 10 years if something happens and you don't have anybody driving? So these are things that are going to come. Resources have to be spent on those issues, not on necessarily, we should test drivers, no doubt, but we should always be like, there's something new that's going to come. Let's prepare for that. There'll be regulatory changes required. There will be capacity building required for those things. And they're going to drive down the cost of doing business. That is the only reason why they're viable and being developed in the first place. So that's my contribution to this discussion. I yield back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. I think you made a very good point by saying that regulators and private sector players must come on the same table and discuss on who bears the loss. Honestly, you well put it. We cannot keep paying demurrage charges, storage, those penalties, and yet we solely do not bear the responsibility. So we really, I think, something, and I hope the rapporteurs are noting that. That's something to note, and that is really, really important. We have seen disruptions caused by this pandemic, but at the end of the day, we are in it together, and nobody should work in isolation. We need to come on the table, and we refocus the sector and see how we we can make it work for all the sector players. Thank you so much, Ali. And let's go back to Mr. Auni. Mr. Auni, I just want to your take on what lessons have been presented by COVID-19 that could inform new approaches to doing businesses in transport and logistics. What do you think? What are the lessons would you have we learned, and what would you advise as new approaches to doing businesses in the transport and logistics? And maybe before you respond, I beg your indulgence, all attendees and panelists, that if you're not talking, kindly mute your phone. Sorry, mute your microphone. Mute your microphone. Kindly mute before I call up someone called Edgar, Embassy of Korea. Kindly mute. Kindly mute. I beg your indulgence, everyone. And I also request that in this final hour, we are going to approach a recovery strategy. Each panelist will talk about the recovery strategy, and I will request that if you do not mind, you just put on your video. We see you. You tell us how to recover while we look at you. So, Mr. Auni, what lessons have you learned, sir, that could inform a new way of doing businesses going forward? Mr. Auni left the call.
No, I'm still here. Sorry.
Yes.
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 You asked,
you had the question.
Yes, you asked about. I had the question is just because I put it on speaker. I had to reconnect my mic. It took me a bit of time. So you asked about.
What lessons have been presented by COVID-19 that could inform new approaches to doing business in the transport and logistics sector, Mr. Auni? And if you don't mind, we'll just put on your video. You can look at you, sir.
Okay. Then I'll have to go on to another equipment here. Unfortunately, this desktop of mine does not have a video.
Okay, no problem. You could just go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I mentioned a part of it earlier in terms of aligning our business to the various protocols that were to be observed, which were basically shorter working hours, social distancing, working from home, reorganizing the shifts of staff and how to manage that. One of our learnings has been on that. It is something you would not actually do in normal circumstance, but having this pandemic on you, and you're kind of not only obliged but by law required to do that. It did give us a huge. I think when I think back on it, it's given us some huge advantages. One, our teams are actually much closer now than ever before. We are able to get a team's call in at literally within minutes. So it's been easier to work with the technology. We have pushed our major principles, being the port and customs, to enhance their digital space and digital workings. Modules were put in place by these authorities, which we helped them and drove them to into. So a lot of things have been positive in terms of the day-to-day work and process that we have. The only negative that I see coming out of what we've gone through is that you really actually tend to lose a bit of the personal touch. That's quite important in our business, actually. But then we have gotten used to it. We are able to communicate freely. We are able to work fairly effortlessly, if I can put it. And our main principals have been happy to work along there. So the only thing has been working from home has been an issue. It's difficult to monitor your staff or other people even from external agencies who are said to be working from home, and then you hear somebody has been seen near a particular area which is quite different from where it's supposed to be. So I think those were the only negatives of our learning through the process. But going forward, we have continued with being able to coordinate better. We had a whole we developed a whole plan and used to hold what we used to call at that time crisis meetings every week with all the managers, not only around Kenya but around the region, because remember we are part of a huge corridor going into even our region includes Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somalia, and Eritrea. So yeah, it has been really eventful, but also we have put in place a number of things that can tomorrow be able to be used to A, cut your cost, B, be more efficient, and C, overall offer a different quality of service to your customers. You know, the old days we used to imagine running around with a piece of paper was what we were actually, in fact, not imagine. That's the only thing a clearing agent was doing, and that's how still a lot of perception in that field. But now that's going away. People are realizing that logistics is much more than pushing papers. We are coming up with good innovative solutions. We developed a good warehouse and distribution system, which helps a number of our customers to hold their stocks and still keep their customers, online customers, and the other places which are essential supply places open. So yeah, I think I can just relate to those as a personal experiences and what we have done as a company. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Aouni. Well put. Honestly, adherence to the protocols is very key, as you mentioned, and adoption of technology in this new normal that we're working in. It's quite important, and also definitely alluding to working from home and the inefficiency that is around that. But that's the situation we're in, and we hope we'll continue to learn from each other and to emulate all the best practices that could be available elsewhere. Let me go back to Dr. Marian, and there has been disruptions in the transport and logistics sector, including loss of jobs to companies and employees. Dr. Marian, what strategies should be put in place to recover these jobs, in your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the biggest strategy that should be put in place is the public-private dialogue enhancement, because we know what we've gone through. We know what we need to recover from the effect of the pandemic, and unless government sits with us and we design solutions to come out of this together, we might take longer. We will recover, of course, but it could take much longer. So my first take would be public-private dialogue, engaging and engaging formally and meaningfully would be the first one. If we go into details, I would say that as we engage the governments formally and discuss the way forward, we focus on, for us in the logistics and transport sector, it's about boosting other businesses because we cut across all the businesses. That's where we survive. So we advocate for all the businesses to see how to boost them. And key in the region that every country tries to focus on is manufacturing. We need to do studies, we need to do research to find out how our manufacturers can manufacture competitively and be able to not only produce for the East African region, but to be able to produce quality and export. So that would be another strategy that we take. How do we boost our manufacturers? How do they manufacture qualitatively and competitively? That we should focus on that. And then the famous agriculture, same strategy. We do studies, we do research, we make sure that we have enough food, first of all, food security for the whole region. And for us, this comes with the distribution business because every food that's grown, we distribute it. And that's another area to focus on. So, but basically, the point is public-private engagement, public-private dialogue to design the solutions together. That's the biggest strategy and favor we can do to our countries. Otherwise, if we do that, jobs and jobs for companies and jobs for employees will be back for sure. I thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Miriam. That is very pertinent. That's very key. We need, as I said from the beginning, that we need to sit on the table. We engage further and engage strongly to ensure that these jobs are cushioned, the jobs are protected, and sector players are quite protected. I can see Mr. Robert Wafakulera has joined the call. Mr. Robert, you're available. Could you just confirm that you're available, sir?
Yes, I'm available. How are you?
Fine, thank you, sir. You're welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Robert, now that you have the microphone, I just wanted to ask you, as a practitioner in the transport and logistics industry yourself, what would be a lasting solution for all partner states to facilitate the movement of cargo amidst this COVID-19 pandemic? This is Robert. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It is not a big task because some things have been done in East Africa as a region. Member states in East Africa have been putting measures to make sure there is control of spread of the pandemic of COVID. But in respect of the movement of cargo, the movement of trucks from one country to another. So there are a lot. What is very important is the joint action and the joint implementation of different measures put down by the countries, and also a continued dialogue between the member states so that they can be able to get a better solution or a lasting solution or a quick solution to make sure that this pandemic does not last long in this region. So number two is the private sector. How do we work together? How do we discuss? How do we work with government. Government will put measures, government will want to implement different measures, but what is our participation as a private sector? So what I think the partnership between the government and the private sector will make it easy for the business to continue and even to make this issue of the pandemic go away quickly and we go back to business. What I've seen, for example, in Rwanda stood up and put serious measures which we thought would be not good for business, but at the end we found it has given a solution to business. We started with lockdown, almost 30 days. Later on, there was close of borders, talking of the flights at the airports, and then the strategy they put to make sure that because they had closed the border, they stopped the entrance. I mean, control the drivers coming from the region to go up Kigali or anywhere in the country was a measure that facilitated the spread, the control of the spread of the corona in the country. Today in Rwanda, internally, people are doing business as usual. The problem we have now is only around the borders, where we find the border of Congo, from the border of Uganda, from the border of Tanzania, where you still find some people who are positive because of the interaction with people from other countries. This has helped a lot Rwanda to continue in business, but still we still have a problem that if in the region people don't cooperate, they don't respect what they agree, we shall continue this problem. Trading in the region is very, very important. If you see in the whole of Africa, East Africa is where we have a big percentage where we intertrade, trading within the East Africa. But if we continue to have this process, our businesses will be slow, and the logistics and transport will always have a problem. So I think it's about a dialogue, a partnership between private sector and the government, between governments and governments. That we shall have a quick solution, and maybe, and the more we take, of course, we shall always have problems. Each country will try to get a solution. You know what is happening in Rwanda, what has happened at the border of Kenya and Uganda, where you find trucks stay at the border for a long time. What happened with Rwanda and Tanzania, where trucks never crossed for almost 14 days. So this is about sitting down together, talk about this, and find the best solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. That's a very important submission. Definitely, the partnership between the private sector and the government is very key. And I think Dr. Marian alluded to we need to stop working in silos, to stop working in isolation, and also the point of the role of the private sector in this fight. That's very key that you brought out, sir. Thank you very much. Actually, I would, in terms of what the private sector is doing, I need to maybe allude to what EABC has been doing. EABC has been playing a very, very critical and vital role in terms of trying to ensure that this partnership, this dialogue that Mr. Robert is talking about actually happens and makes a difference. We have seen really the regional private sector body, which is the East African Business Council, fully engaged on a day and night basis, trying to ensure that we have a harmonized system of implementing measures, a coordinated approach, which actually, if had been there, all these issues wouldn't have happened. So really, I need to applaud the EABC for their good work they are doing. I remember, I think last week we had a queue of almost 50 kilometers at Namanga border, and EABC intervened, and at least we have seen cargo now trying to move. And not only that border, but I've seen Namanga, Busia, Ilegu. EABC has been doing a lot, and we really applaud. Maybe just to go back to Dr. Marian, the East African partner states have recently announced their 2020-2021 budgets that will guide the recovery of economies from COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Marian, do you think the budgets addressed the movement of goods across East Africa partner states work towards recovery, so they can work towards recovery? And maybe to pick back to that also, I would like you to mention something on the Naivasha ICD and its implications. Do you think it's going to make a business case in this regard, Dr. Marian?
Thank you. I'm not a keen follower of budgets, but to a great extent, yes, I think the cross-border movement of cargo has been addressed, because there is nobody, no country now that has been working and not looking at COVID. Every attention has been turned to COVID. And I wish to take the opportunity, by the way, to thank East African Business Council. They've been very supportive. What you just mentioned, the public-private dialogue, they have taken it seriously, like you said, day and night, and they have ensured that our thoughts from the bottom level to the top level have been shared, and the decisions have been taken from there. So that brings me back to what we've been sharing with our governments. And in the COVID situation, I know most governments have tended to run to the private sector to work together. Or we have knocked at their doors and they have opened, because all of us were in a shock. None of us, none of the sectors, whether public or private, was an expert in this. So we needed each other, and we did dialogue a lot. And we did contribute, at least I know for the case of Uganda, we contributed a lot to the budget. And normally in East Africa, yes, I know there is a consultative process before the budget is finalized, and we have, because this was what was at the center of our hearts, is what we were pouring out to the governments as they budgeted, and some policies, if no funds have been allocated to infrastructure, or then there has been policy towards movement of cargo, continuous or continued movement of cargo was touched by each country, because we needed the supplies to keep going. We needed the economies, the revenues to keep collected, and we governments, yes, the budgets to a great extent did address, could not be directly, but policy-wise, yes. Finances, not so sure. However, like I said before, for our business, if the other businesses are surviving, if the manufacturing, the agriculture, the distribution, the policies are conducive, the budgets have been catered for, then our business has been catered for. But for Uganda in particular, I will say that yes, this budget, we contributed heavily to it, and they did put money and focus on multimodal transport, because of those border traffic buildup. they've put money in the budget to rehabilitate the meter gauge railway. They've put in place money to refurbish or renovate or whatever they call it, the vessels on Lake Victoria going to Mwanza and going to Kisumu. At least I know two were allocated money, and they've they're investing in key ports like Port Bell and Bokassa, and okay, Bokassa was ongoing, but for now, this budget, we focused on the vessels on Lake Victoria, on rehabilitation of the meter gauge, on dry port, the Rwanda dry port at the border of Rusumo. I don't know how far it has gone now. It had hiccups at the beginning, but Uganda has borrowed best practice, perhaps. However, it's not mandatory. It's not going to be mandatory. It will cater for that relay driving. It will cater for transshipment. We are creating a dry port in Tororo, where the railway is, where we used transship before, because the wagons and locomotives of Kenya would come and stop in Tororo, and the locomotives of Uganda and their wagons take over. So transshipment for railway can happen. We have they have put money in the budget for that dry port. Of course, they have contributed and are participating in the regional electronic cargo and driver tracking system, and the private sector journey management system also has been adopted by all the countries, but we are not sure how to go about it. And I will answer early and say that the RECTs actually had hit a hiccup because, like you said, it's very expensive to maintain. So when we give it to the private sector or join with the private sector, we are assuming we have a way it will work without being expensive if it's linked to the journey management system, because it will belong to the private sector, and governments will not be burdened with it. However, they are willing to support it as much as they can. At least I know for Uganda, they have already said they'll host the journey management system in the government, whatever. And they have invested, all countries, at least I know Kenya and Uganda are going to invest in the designated stop places for the trucks and truck drivers, and it's quite a bit of investment. And most important, like I said, they are committed to partnership with the private sector. And with that, we think, yes, the budgets to a great extent, because they have engaged the private sector, we believe each sector of the economy had an input into the budgets, and it must have been addressed because it impacts on everybody. Manufacturers were running out of raw materials. We had to ask for intervention for them, like the ones in Eastern region. We would say at the border, please allow the drivers of the raw materials to move, give them escort, they move, they drop the cargo, and then go back to the border to wait for their results. So this is how we think the partnerships are going to work. And the governments are warming up to that kind of public-private dialogue, and it's helping. So I am confident that our issues were addressed to a large extent in Uganda. for multimodal transport, supporting multimodal transport, but I know that in other countries there is a consultative process before the budget where the whole private sector gives proposals. So you wanted me to touch on the Naivasha.
Yes, absolutely.
Naivasha, I would have passed it on to Mr. Auni, but I also attempt, but he has tried it out. Like I said, when we got shortage of trucks and what people had to think outside the box, and Mr. Baiji is one of them that tried the Naivasha. Bolore tried the Naivasha dry pot, and we have been looking forward to sharing their experience, how it went. The way we looked at it in Uganda, it was it's okay. It's an initiative. It's welcome. It's an additional facility facilitating trade, and it's creating competition for Dar es Salaam, for Mombasa, for Eldoret, and we know that competition drives cost down, and for us in the private sector, we welcome it. However, the way it was brought on board was the problem. It was mandatory. And mandatory, we said, cannot work because we have contractual obligations or contracts, international ones, governed by international law, and the cargo has ownership, and government. We all know that governments don't own any cargo. If they have their own, they could have said all government cargo can go to Naivasha, but definitely it's a welcome addition, but it should not be mandatory. That was our only problem, the main one. But the other one was, it was in the middle of an, I think, I'm speaking members' views, those who visited, those who did their research, what they were telling us is it's in the middle of a national park, the nearest town is so many kilometers away, all those, but those to me were not important. What was important is that it's welcome as an additional facility, and it should be left to choice. It should be optional. If I see the added value, the advantage of going to Naivasha, I would choose to go to Naivasha. It's my cargo, but you cannot choose for me. I think that was the only issue. But if you don't mind, I think we still have a bit of time. I would request that Mr. Baiji says something about his experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to bring in Mr. Baiji to comment on that. But also, Mr. Baiji, I was looking at our Twitter handle comments, and one of them is requesting us to ask Bolore, how have the long queues at the borders affected your revenue projections, looking at the level of clearance of trucks at the borders? And now question number 2, which will be number 3, as a big logistics group, to what extent has employment been affected? Maybe you give your individual company experience. So you touch on the Naivasha ICD and the jobs lost have been affected, and also how have the long queues at the borders affected your revenue projections, looking at the level of clearance of trucks at the borders? Mr. Baiji, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam President. I first talk about Naivasha. As a company, and as part of our CSR program, we decided that the journey between Mombasa up to Nairobi and a little bit beyond, i.e. Naivasha, can be cut by us railing containers into Naivasha. And the CSR activity was simply towards reducing the COVID spread or contamination or whatever you might say. And we moved the first train load of 100 and something containers on May the 6th. The experience in terms of getting the wagons loaded in Mombasa and the train up to Naivasha was very good, because obviously it was a big event and we had quite a good delegation from the government coming to receive the train on the 7th of May in Naivasha. We have continued, we had decided to do this as a measure for at least a month. Why am I saying it was a CSR thing? Because apart from the fact that what Madam has talked about, in that somebody started, or I think there was some requirement or mandatory or there was move by government to make it mandatory to move transit cargo into Naivasha. The bigger issue actually is the cost. I do not see why any businessman is going to pay about $200 more to move their container through Naivasha rather than bringing it direct from road from Mombasa. So the bigger aspect is the cost. We did bring up this issue to government at that time, on that day, even as recently as 2 weeks ago, when we held a meeting with the CS and the PS and everybody else involved in raising the flow and volume of cargo into Naivasha, that the rate has to change. If you will have seen last week, then there was a small reduction by Kenya Railways on a promotional tariff to bring down the rate from $600 to $480. This is still not enough to move all cargo. It may be enough only to move your 20-foot heavy boxes. The light containers, you can forget. I'll not go into the mathematics of the matrix itself of moving light 20, heavy 20s, 40-foot containers. But basically, in a nutshell, it is not economically viable to move any 20-foot container less than 15 tons and any 40-foot container by rail through Naivasha. Okay, as I said, I won't go into the whole mathematics, but it is much more expensive to do that. So the government has to address that problem before businesses in Uganda, Rwanda, Sudan, Congo actually make it their preferred choice of moving their containers too. So Naivasha, in a nutshell, has gone on well. We had told the government we'll move our containers for a month, which we have. We have extended it by to another 3 weeks or so, since they've reduced some tariff on the rail rate up. But overall, Naivasha works. Yes, we have issues because there's nothing around the station itself. Staff have to live in Maimaihu, which is quite a distant, or even Naivasha town for that matter. And okay, there are other personnel issues around there, but otherwise, I can tell you the facility is well built. The equipment is there, the resources needed are there, the security systems are in place. The rail works quite efficiently. We have moved over the 1,000+ containers in import and hundreds of containers of export down that from and to Naivasha. So all in all, it works well. So that's my answer on Naivasha. How long we can continue to sustain a small loss is something that we as a company will have to decide in the days to come. If government does not actually decide permanently to give favorable rates by rail. Because I think the logic for anybody talking about moving cargo by rail or road, automatic assumption is it's got to be cheaper by rail. We are not even saying we want it cheaper. We are saying, can we have it at the same cost as road? So let's leave it at that for the time being. Ongoing discussions on that. For the question on revenue hit in terms of the long queues at the border, it's just been two issues which have affected us. One is it's obviously cost us a lot more to move our trucks to the border, waiting time, driver's allowances, the fact that we have cargo still lying in Mombasa or wherever waiting to be uplifted, so there are some storage elements. So actually, it's just the cost which has been a hindrance. So yes, our revenues have been affected, but generally this is on the basis of either storage or trucks not being able to turn around fast enough, and the cost of maintaining crews en route. Otherwise, in terms of the other revenues, they have been fairly constant. We have had reduction, obviously, because of the volume of imports went down. It's picking up now, and I expect that this trend should continue. Finally, as a company, I can answer the issue of jobs lost. And then I will answer the jobs lost in the industry. So as a company, we went through a very careful exercise to not to impact and have empathy for the staff. So what we did was we calibrated the way we were working in each department and worked out a method by which staff could first, take their leave, first whatever paid leave which was there. So far, we have not had to go to the level of staff having to take unpaid leave. Maybe one of the only other measures we made with the authority was to see, can we have a temporary moratorium on paying, for example, quite a big cost for us is the pension for the staff. So that is one of the measures we took, which had to be taken to keep actually all the staff on. So basically, for us, we have not laid off any staff so far. People have been able to take off, come back, go back again, take leave. The only thing we said that whatever leave you take now, hopefully when everything is back to normal, you're ready to work throughout that period, whether it's 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, whatever it is, without leave. So that's worked pretty well. For the industry, what I do know from many of the companies who are members of our, by the way, I'm also the chair of the Transport and Infrastructure Sector Board at KEPSA, is that there have been job losses, especially in Mombasa, with a lot of companies who have had to face issues with, one, the lockdowns in Mombasa, two, cargo moving into Nairobi or Naivasha, three, transport companies which were unable to meet their financial requirements and things like that. So all in all, in the industry, in the last count, about I would say about maybe beginning at the end of May, we had between 8,000 to 10,000 jobs lost in the whole industry. Yeah. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. That's a very important thing, and I think we from how trying to maintain the at almost every company, and we can only pick a leaf from what Bolore is doing. I want to bring back Mr. Roberts Fakulera, the chairman of Rwanda Private Sector Federation. Mr. Roberts, what would you recommend as a recovery strategy for the private sector players in the transport and logistics sector?
Geoffrey,
what would you?
Sorry, Geoffrey. Just one last. I request to be excused because, as you know, I had taken some time off to get out of my emergency for this webinar. So, if there's anything else, of course, people are free to, ask you or Ambassador, and then we'll be able to come back to you if there are any other clarification points or questions that may come up. So on that note, I'll say thank you very much to EABC, to all the panelists here, to all the participants who have taken their time. It's been a pleasure, and hope to have another one very, very soon. Thank you and good evening.
You are on mute, Geoffrey.
Yeah, Geoffrey, you are on mute.
Oh, sorry. I was saying thank you so much, Mr. Auni, for your valuable time that you've given us. We don't take it for granted. Your expert points and inputs have been well taken care of and well noted, and we definitely share what comes out of this webinar to all of us, so that we will get a feel of the region in terms of how to recover the sector. Thank you so much, and we really, you can be excused for now. Going back to, just to continue with Mr. Roberts, what would be your recommendations to the private sector players in terms of recovering from these adverse effects that are caused by COVID-19? And to couple it with a question, another question is, Dr. Marion said that they are trying to pick a leaf from Rwanda in terms of trying to operate dry ports and putting a dry port somewhere in Uganda. What would be your experience that would share in terms of how it is happening in Rwanda? How is the Kianzi port, I think it's called Kianzi, how is it working, and do you think it's helping so that other partners can borrow a leaf from what Rwanda is doing in terms of trying to facilitate movement of cargo? Over to you, Mr. Robert.
Thank you, Godfrey. We have learned a lot of lessons through these pandemic issues, and you are asking how do we recover from this. Maybe we now know that a pandemic like this is causing a lot of problems. One is causing problems because the method of controlling it or measures from one country to another are not similar, and they don't have a formula. So because of this, there have been a lot of misunderstandings, some conflicting views, some, of course, causing a lot of losses for the private sector. We have lost a lot of money in terms of operations and in terms of moving our cargo from ports and the images from shipping lines. However, I would say also that since we have the East African community, it is a binding factor that we are in East African community and we are one. I would urge private sector federation to continue to be one, even be united more than better than government. Also, I would urge the states to be one, because what I've discovered during this time is that if you are one, and we can fight this kind of pandemic in a shorter time. So how do we, as private sector, could be one more people who are in logistics and the transport? It is only technology that can make us one. For example, what has happened in this region, in Rwanda, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, even in the region, it's because we are not one. If we are one, even if the losses we have made maybe would be less. But the only way we can be one, of course, is a discussion like this. But number two is the technology platforms. If we could be all in one or two platforms, then the border issue cannot happen. And the solution can be quick. But because we operate individually, individual transporter, individual state, and so on, it becomes very hard to coordinate information, to share information, even to find solution together. So the only way is that togetherness. And if you see in the whole world, every country, every continent is affected different. But because people are not sharing the solution, everyone is handling the case differently. It has been, in some parts of the world, it has been worse. Other parts of the world, they have managed the pandemic. So I feel on top of technology, there must be an understanding that we must fight together in such kind of situation. Even if we will be having some differences, we put differences aside, but we fight whatever come across and will affect our businesses together. This is, I think, it's the biggest solution I can give. But of course, our leaders in government do work very hard to make sure the East African community come together, work together in all whatever is put in place to make sure the East African community become one. So literally, that's what I can say. Maybe what you asked me, what experience you have had on this dry port of Kianzi. One is that it created a lot of problems which we didn't expect. Everybody expected it to be smooth and everybody expected that to give a solution. But of course, to give a solution in terms of control of pandemic, but it created also problems whereby people are not understanding how it's going to work. And it took time for people to get used to it. So what they're starting in Uganda, I'm saying it is not easy, but it needs to work very hard, government to work very hard, private sector to work with government, and the government to work with private sector in order to get a better solution. Otherwise, it creates a lot of losses if you don't handle it well, if you don't manage it well. You people are not working 24 hours. Otherwise, it can create the issue of delays here and there. There were delays before, but this can be worse if it is not properly planned. And of course, there must be respect of the trans cargo, because otherwise it can also become worse if trans cargo cannot move properly. In Rwanda, we escort all trans cargo. We also make sure also the fuel and so on, which can be of much problem if it is not properly handled. It is always escorted to depots, and also perishable goods, make sure nothing is going. So that is some of my experiences, but otherwise it has made Rwanda free of, almost 80–90% free of coronavirus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robert. That's very important. And as you put it, we cannot work individually. At least as a private sector, the only solution is to speak one voice, work as one to ensure that cargo moves. We need to invest a lot in trying to ensure that at least our systems work, and the adoption of technology, as you've mentioned, is very key. Basically, engaging with the government and try to facilitate and putting up facilitation measures that will help movement of cargo and respect of transit routes, transit goods, and prioritizing perishable goods is quite key. So I think Dr. Miriam picks a leaf from you, and I hope as they develop theirs, they could engage further. I want to thank you very much, but before we close, I can see we're already 2 minutes past, but I want to give everyone just 2 minutes to give a round of a closing remark and and give us a bit of a feel of the webinar and how we think we can engage further. So I will start with Marian. I can see your hand up. As you close, you also maybe raise what you wanted to say, but maybe in 2 minutes maximum, so that we can close this discussion. Thank you, Marian.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I had wanted to close, but let me re-emphasize the need for the private sector to speak with one voice, whether as a region or as a country. If we don't speak with one voice, we are standing on shaky ground. So thank you, Robert, for bringing that out, and EABC for always reminding us of that. I wanted to close with a request for 2 things to be carried forward by East African Business Council. We've seen you are very effective, and I hope this one you will work on it, and you can work on it very fast. One was raised about the demurrage and the storage that is happening, and we all know why. I went through the border process and how long trucks take to reach their destinations and come back, and the depletion of bonds. I would like you to recommend that we have electronic cargo tracking system with electronic seals on trucks. I would request that on the cargo that is has an electronic seal, we don't bond at all, 0 bond, or at worst 50% bonding, because one, there is no risk because it's in the system, it's being watched, the driver is watched, the cargo is watched. So where is the risk for the tax? So that we should bond it 100% the due tax. So that one is very key. I've been looking for an opportunity to bring it. Then I know my 2 minutes are over. The next one is the demurrage and storage. We need to quantify. I would like you to take it up. I will send you the figures, the statistics, but to quantify the time that has been cut by curfew, the time that has been cut by starting time, for example, in the ports. So the time that is not being worked, if we can deduct it from the storage, it's a formula that shipping lines should be seen to see, because they don't make loss, because anyway, the trucks will not come back soon. So they are making much more money than they would have made if there was no COVID. So on that, very much money, like 20 times more than they should be making, can act the time that is not being worked. So start at 10, we close at 3. So really, I would wish that one also to be taken forward by EABC. I thank you.
Thank you so much.
So
You're speaking to ears that yes, are quite open, and as usual, EABC will take it up. Our rapporteurs have taken note of it, and we will definitely look forward to the statistics so that we can make a case to make a case more solid. Thank you so much. We will take it up as requested. If Mr. Ali is still around, you can also give us a few, like 1 minute closing remark or 2. And if he's not there, we'll request Mr. Robert to also give his a bit of a wrap-up lines, 1 or 2 minutes, Mr. Robert.
Yeah, first of all, I would thank you for the invitation, and I would thank also all speakers for their contributions. And again, as a conclusive remarks, I think going forward, let us work together as the East African. Let us find solutions together. Let us share experiences together as private sector people, And we work also with government to advise the government properly, so that they can also support private sector in all countries in East Africa. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman, for those remarks. We thank you so much for making time. We really wouldn't have had very successful without your experts' input. Thank you so much, Mr. Robert. On behalf of EABC Chairman, CEO, Dr. Peter Mathuki, let me thank you very much. But before we close, I would want to at least read out a few recommendations that have come out of this this webinar. And the meeting, the first recommendation is that we need to embrace the use of technology, digitize, for example, digital certification. That is very important, came out very, very pertinently. Number two is further engagement between government and private sector on costs incurred due to COVID-19 along the supply chain. Need to ensure a coordinated approach, especially quick testing, avoid traffic and its associated challenges. We need to enhance the use and implementation of regional cargo and driver tracking system to minimize the challenges faced by different stakeholders. And number five, regulators in transport sector from different partner states should closely work together to minimize the challenges faced by transporters along the supply chain. And number six is enhancing the public-private dialogue so as to design solutions for quick recovery from COVID-19 and thereafter create jobs. We need to allocate resources to, there is need to allocate resources to research and studies to boost other businesses like the manufacturing, both qualitatively and quantitatively. There's need for joint implementation and continued dialogue between the partner states. If I beg someone to mute their mics, please, as you wrap up.
Ameshakamilisha mpaka gate 4. Kwa hiyo magati yaliyokamilika ni 5. Lile la kupakulia magari, lakini na magati mengine 4 ambayo tayari sasa hivi yote ya
Chairman Robert, kindly mute your mic, please. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We are going to share these recommendations to your emails, and where you feel you can get touch base to us again, then we will definitely thank you. On behalf of CEO Dr. Peter Mathuki, let me sincerely thank you so much, dear panelists, for your time and your expert inputs to this webinar. We really don't take for granted, and we thank you so very much. The recommendations that have come from this webinar will be taken further to the higher levels to ensure that our advocacy work is done effectively. Thank you very much. We wish you a very fruitful day. I need to thank the participants who took their time to attend this webinar, wherever you are. The background support that you've been giving to moderate has been appreciated. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate that. Otherwise, I thank you so much. This is just a series of other webinars that are planned ahead, and you'll definitely receive many of our invitations going forward until this common enemy that we are fighting, the front line, will end successfully. Thank you so much, and have a very, very blessed evening. Keep safe, and may God bless you. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
God bless you all. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary. Bye-bye.
Bless